They called me boy, not by name, but like I was less than human, a shadow in their golden palace, a servant with no past and no future. I remember the day of the Grand Harvest Festival. Drums echoed through the valley, women danced in crimson wrappers, and the village chief's compound shimmered with stolen wealth. Laughter filled the air, but it didn't reach my corner of the courtyard, where I scrubbed blood-red dust from boots that had kicked me more than once. My fingers were raw, but I kept my head down. That day, the chief's wife, fat with gold bangles and powdered pride, ordered me to polish the ancestral throne carved from mahogany, saying, "Even if filth touches royalty, it must still shine." I was the filth. They said I was found in a sack near the river 15 years ago, wrapped in rags, half dead, crying like a lost animal. A priest took me in, but when he died, I was passed from hand to hand until I ended up here, working from sunrise to moonlight in silence. I didn't cry anymore. I learned to speak only when spoken to. I learned to vanish when footsteps approached. But that festival day, something changed. I saw a man I had never seen before, standing near the outer fence, dressed in plain robes, but with eyes sharp like a hawk. He wasn't dancing, he wasn't smiling, he was watching me. Our eyes met only for a breath, but in that second, I felt like he had seen something in me, something even I had forgotten. I turned away quickly, afraid of being punished for idling. Later that evening, while serving palm wine to the chief and his circle of arrogant sons, one of them, Dami, the loudest and cruelest, yanked me by the collar and said, "This one thinks he's special. Maybe he dreams of wearing a crown, eh?" They all laughed, but his eyes burned with something deeper, not just mockery, but fear. The stranger was still there, lurking in the shadows by the flame-lit trees, unmoving, and then I heard the whisper, soft, like a snake sliding across a polished floor. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, but no one was behind me. Just smoke, laughter, and the rhythm of drums growing louder. But in that moment, a tremor passed through my bones. Not fear, but a memory, or maybe a warning, trying to claw its way back into the light. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the cold mat behind the chicken shed, my thin blanket damp from dew, staring up at the stars while the drums of the festival throbbed into the early hours. My body ached from crouching all day, but my mind raced, haunted by the eyes of the stranger and the whisper that clung to my ears like a ghost. "You shouldn't be here." What did that mean? Who had said it? My breath came shallow as I tried to shake it off, but something inside me had shifted. The next day, the compound was a mess. Overturned calabashes, stained floors, drunken guests still sleeping under trees. I was ordered to clean the main hut where the chief held court, and while scrubbing near the back, I overheard whispers between Dami and his father. "He's asking too many questions," the chief muttered. "If he finds the ledger, everything unravels." Dami scoffed. "He's just a houseboy. He can't read, can't think." Still, maybe it's time we remind him of his place. I froze. They couldn't have been talking about me, but something about the tone, the urgency in their voices. It felt personal. I scrubbed harder, trying to disappear. Days passed, but that stranger kept returning, always standing at a distance, never speaking, just watching. The chief noticed too. He doubled the guards. "There are whispers," he told the elders, "of a rebellion, or worse, of the boy coming back." My heart kicked. The boy? What boy? That evening, I found an old woman sitting near the mango tree, chewing cola nuts with her toothless gums. She looked straight through me and croaked, "You look like your mother, boy." I knelt beside her, afraid, curious. "You knew her?" I asked. She chuckled. "Everyone did. The real queen, the kind one, not this jackal's wife with gold on her fingers and blood on her hands." I didn't understand. She leaned close. "They said you died in the river, but I knew better. You were the baby with the birthmark." She grabbed my wrist and yanked it upward. There it was, a faint crescent-shaped mark on the inside of my arm. My throat dried. "You're not meant to serve pigs," she whispered. "You're meant to rule lions." I stumbled away in disbelief. Could it be true? Me? A prince? But how? Why would no one say anything? That night, I searched the outer huts for answers. I found a locked chest in the chief's quarters, hidden under rotting mats. I picked the rusted lock with a chicken bone, something I had learned from another servant who used to steal dried meat from the stores. Inside were old scrolls, a broken necklace, and a tattered cloth with a royal insignia. The same design carved into the palace gates, the same symbol etched into my nightmares. My hand shook as I held the necklace. It had a small carving of a lion's head, the royal crest of the fallen house. That was when I heard the footsteps. Dami. He stood in the doorway, arms folded, face twisted with rage and fear. "So it's true," he spat. "I told father we should have drowned you when we had the chance." He lunged, but I ran. Through the halls, past the stables, over the fence. I ran until my lungs screamed. I didn't stop until I reached the shrine near the edge of the forest, the place no one dared go. The stranger was there, waiting. "You found it," he said calmly. "You remember now." I looked at him through the fog of fear. "Who are you?" He stepped forward, removed his hood, and I saw the scar across his jaw. "Captain Nuru, your father's most loyal guard." My knees buckled. "He caught me before I fell. They murdered your parents, burned the palace, told the kingdom you had died, but I found you, floating, barely breathing. I gave you to the priest for safety, but then I was captured, tortured. It took me years to return. I couldn't speak. My mind spun. The people think you're dead," he said, "but some still remember. Some still hope." I wanted to scream, to rage, but instead I whispered, "Why me? I'm just a servant. I don't know anything." Nuru smiled sadly. "That's what makes you ready. You've seen cruelty. You've known hunger. You've served the very people who stole your throne. You don't need a crown to be royal. You need courage." For the first time in my life, I felt something awaken inside me. Not fear, but fire. But we had no army, no allies. Just me, a servant boy with calloused hands and forgotten blood, and a broken captain who carried ghosts in his eyes. "Then we begin," Nuru said, and so we did. At night we crept through the villages. We spoke to elders in secret, shared the truth in whispers, rebuilt trust with old families. I listened to tales of my parents, how my mother healed with herbs, how my father ruled with wisdom. I studied maps, learned strategy. Nuru taught me to wield a blade, not for revenge, but for justice. And slowly a movement grew. The silent began to speak. The broken began to rise. But with every step forward, danger snapped at our heels. Dami sent men to hunt me. They burned huts of those who aided us. They spread lies that I was an imposter, a sorcerer, a curse. But I kept going, fueled by memories I never had, but somehow knew were mine. The night we returned to the chief's compound was darker than any before, the moon hidden behind bruised clouds, the wind thick with the scent of fire and reckoning. Word had spread like wildfire. The boy thought dead had returned, not as a beggar, but as a rightful heir. I wore no crown, only my scars, my silence, and the lion head necklace that once belonged to my mother. Beside me walked Nuru, a blade strapped to his back, his eyes scanning every rooftop and shadow. We didn't come with an army, just a handful of brave villagers, elders, and former guards who had once served under my father, and were now ready to bleed for the truth. As we approached, we saw them, Dami and his brothers standing at the gate, swords drawn, flanked by mercenaries with cold eyes. The chief was not with them. "Turn back," Dami sneered. "This is your last chance, houseboy." But I no longer trembled at that word. "I am no houseboy," I said quietly, voice steady, echoing through the night. "I am the son of King Azuka and Queen Niari. I am the blood they tried to erase. The gates swung open, and the crowd gathered. Servants, villagers, those who had once laughed when I fell, now staring in stunned silence. "Lies!" shouted Dami, his voice cracking. "He has no proof." I reached into my tunic and pulled out the scroll, the original royal decree bearing my name and the mark of the Elders' Council, preserved in the very chest they had tried to hide. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One of the old priests stepped forward, trembling, and said, "That mark. I anointed him as an infant. That scar above his brow. He got it on the night the palace burned. I was there." Dami's blade shook. "Kill them all," he roared, but before he could strike, Nuru moved like lightning, disarming two mercenaries in a blur. The villagers surged forward, not with weapons, but with fury. Women threw stones. Old men raised farming tools, and even the children screamed curses at the traitors. Chaos erupted, but I didn't run. I walked straight into the heart of the storm, right up to Dami, who now stood alone as his brothers fled like rats. "You were born in silk," I said, "but you have no spine." He lunged at me, eyes wild, blade swinging. I dodged barely, the steel grazing my shoulder, but I didn't stop. I disarmed him with one move Nuru had drilled into me 1,000 times. I stood over him, sword raised, not to kill, but to end the lie. "You wanted me dead because you knew I reminded this land what true royalty looks like." He spat at me. "You're nothing!" I turned to the crowd and dropped the sword. "I'm not here to wear a crown built on fear. I'm here to restore what was stolen, not just from me, but from all of you." The chief emerged at last, dragged by two of his former allies. His face was pale, defeated. "You were supposed to drown," he muttered. "You were supposed to vanish." I stepped closer. "But dignity doesn't drown," I said, "and truth doesn't vanish. It waits, like a lion in the grass, until the moment to strike." The sun rose over the village like it hadn't in years, not just as light, but as justice, warm and unflinching. That morning, the elders gathered under the old baobab tree, where verdicts had once echoed like thunder. I stood before them, my tunic still torn from the fight, the lion head pendant resting on my chest like a heartbeat that finally found its rhythm. The chief, once feared, now sat bound at the feet of the people he had oppressed, his voice silent, his face lowered. Dami and his brothers had fled in the night, their wealth abandoned, their pride shattered. The villagers who once looked past me now looked toward me, not with pity, but with quiet recognition. Nuru stood beside me, bloodied but unbroken, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, the only one who never needed proof of who I was. The council called forward the priest, the old woman by the mango tree, even a former servant who had hidden the royal scroll in his roof for a decade, risking death each day just in case the boy king returned. The truth no longer whispered, it roared. The elders stripped the chief of his title, declaring him a usurper, a liar, and a murderer, and banished him to the mountains, where no name or legacy could follow him. No sword fell, no blood spilled. Justice didn't scream. It walked calmly through the square and erased the past with grace. I refused to sit on the throne that day. Instead, I walked through the market barefoot, nodding at the fruit sellers who once tossed peels at my head, greeting the guards who had once ignored my bruises. "You remember me now?" I asked one man, and he looked away in shame. But I didn't come for apologies. I came for remembrance. That night by the fire, Nuru spoke softly. "You could rebuild the palace, make it grander than before." I stared at the stars. "No," I said, "I'll rebuild the people. The palace can wait." We started with the school that had been closed since the war, opening its doors to every child, servant or not. The storehouse was unlocked, its food distributed to the families who had spent years counting grains. No more shackles for servants, no more houseboys. Only sons and daughters of a kingdom that had learned what silence costs. And in quiet moments, I still returned to the edge of the forest, not to run, but to remember where I had once hid, once wept, once found truth in a stranger's eyes. In every corner of the land, my story spread, not as legend, but as proof that the smallest voice can still shake a palace. That dignity can grow even in chains. Years passed, not in silence, but in song. The kind sung by children learning to read beneath the tamarind trees, by women who once scrubbed floors, now running grain markets, by elders who once feared speaking truth, now telling it freely over fireside nights. I never wore the crown, though they crafted one from woven gold and begged me to accept it. Instead, I wore the clothes of the people, plain cotton, leather sandals, hands still calloused not from servitude, but from service. I sat with farmers during harvest, helped build roofs with orphans, and walked behind the widows during remembrance festivals, not ahead of them. They called me Oba, king, but only because I had learned what it meant to be without power. I ruled not with commands, but with questions. What do you need? What do you dream? I asked, and because I listened, they answered. The old compound, once a place of cruelty and secrets, became a center for healing, where wounded soldiers learned to write, where once Spanish families were welcomed with open arms. Nuru, the man who saved my life twice, once as a baby and again as a broken boy, became head of the council. We buried the sword he trained me with beneath the roots of the palace tree, marking it with silence, not triumph. Let peace be sharper than steel, he said, and I never forgot that. The people grew stronger. Our kingdom, once dismissed as weak and conquered by greed, became a place where neighboring lands sent their children to learn dignity, not dominance. One day, while walking near the river, where I had nearly died as an infant, I found a small boy alone, crying. "Are you lost?" I asked. He nodded, holding out a torn sandal. "They took my goat," he said I don't belong. I knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "They once said that about me too," I whispered. "But sometimes the ones who are cast out become the ones who lead everyone home." He looked up, eyes wide, and I smiled, not the smile of a prince reclaiming his birthright, but of a boy who once had nothing and now had enough to share. That evening, I stood before the people during the Festival of Flame, where fire once symbolized fear, but now danced in honor of truth. No grand speeches, just a quiet presence. As the crowd fell silent, I spoke only once, my voice calm, carrying across the field. "Power is not taken, it is returned to those who remember who they are." And as I turned away, the stars above seemed to hum with a peace I had never known. And I finally understood that greatness isn't forged in noise or blood or golden chairs. It's forged in how we carry our scars. And mine were many, but I wore them without shame. Because in the end, I learned the most powerful truth of all. Dignity doesn't shout, it glows from within.